Thank you. I'm like talking into the mic and I realize I'm actually wirelessly mic'd, so that's not necessary. So let's see, I'm Daniel Zen. So I've been working with JavaScript for a really long time, since kind of its beginning. I was an extreme programmer for Google and Pivotal Labs, mostly doing Java. In fact, I got involved with Java at its very beginning. And at the time when I was doing JavaScript along with Java, people were looking at me funny, going, what are you doing with that silly scripting language that's not a real programming language? And I think time has shown that that's really changed. So I started using AngularJS December 2011. I guess that's coming up on 3 years now. Just before the 1.0 betas started to exist, there was this troublesome time then when all the old code was incompatible with the new code. Okay, I'll drop that unless you guys have been, yeah. So I started the AngularJS NYC meetup in May 2012. And then Zen Digital, which was something I did before all of my consulting, just around the time that the internet bubble was popping, that kind of disappeared. And I said, you know what, I'm going to pick that up again, and this time instead of focusing on Java, I'm going to focus on JavaScript and AngularJS and those types of technologies. So we do technology management, we nurture startups, we also work on open source projects for nonprofits and Fortune 500s. We do web and mobile application development, extensions and the like. We focus on standards, open source, and hybrid solutions. So here's a little outline of what I'm going to talk about today. Material design, its principles and properties. So material design itself, relatively new, although if anybody here has an Android device with Lollipop on it, you're experiencing it right now. There are a few websites or web apps that can show it off as well, and there's certainly plenty of demos online. I'm going to be showing a few of those. Just to get an understanding, who here has seen material design in action in one form or another? Okay, it's about a third. So I'm going to be going over some of it again. Especially if 2/3 of you have not seen it, I definitely better give you a little bit of prep so I'm not talking about something you guys have no context for. Then I'm going to I have one slide just to discuss AngularJS. Who here has used AngularJS? More, good, about 50. So unfortunately, that's kind of one of the prereqs for this talk because I'm not teaching AngularJS in this class, but don't worry, a lot of this, a lot of this talk is going to be about material design itself and UI and UX. So don't worry, you'll be fine. I'm going to be discussing Polymer and paper elements because those are the original implementations of material design. And I'm going to touch on web components, which is up-and-coming W3C standards that are hopefully soon to be implemented in the browsers, but are currently available using polyfills. I'm going to talk about the differences between Polymer and AngularJS briefly. And then I'm going to talk about Angular material, and I have some demos to go over. So what were material design's goals? Material design was Google's high-level concept to create a visual language for users that synthesizes classic principles of good design, user interfaces and user experience, and their magical innovation and possibility of technology and science. So these were their lofty goals. They were trying to convey that in the user experience. It is available for web and mobile. Material design provides a single underlying system that allows for a unified experience across platforms and device sizes. Tablets, cell phones, websites. Mobile precepts are fundamental, and touch, voice, mouse, and keyboard are all considered first-class input methods in material design. So material design is a specification for a unified system of visual motion and interaction design that adapts across different devices and different screen sizes. So for those of you that have not seen, I think I will give, no, I guess it's over here, a little brief demo, and I got to turn on my sound so you get the 48-second introduction. Hopefully we can go full screen on this. Looks like we can. for those of you who've never seen it before, now you've got at least a visual introduction that gives you some context. Turning to full screen. So what are some of the principles behind it? Material is a metaphor for what you're able to do with pieces of the user interface. It is bold, graphic, and intentional, and motion is meant to convey meaning. So material is the metaphor. It's supposed to have rational space and motion. It's grounded in a tactile reality when things shouldn't move without some form of interaction from you. It's inspired by paper and ink. Surfaces and edges are meant to provide visual cues. Light, surface, and movement convey how objects move, interact, and exist in space and in relation to each other. And it should appear technologically advanced, and it is open to imagination and magic. Gotta love that part. I love it when they're the lofty goals there. So bold, graphic, and intentional. Its foundations are in print, typography, grids, space, scale, color, and imagery. Very bold imagery. Create a hierarchy with meaning and focus. You have edge-to-edge imagery, large-scale typography, and intentional white space. Core functionality should be immediately apparent just by looking at the app. Emphasis on user actions and immerse the user in the experience, part of the goals. Motion provides meaning that user actions, once again, they initiate the motion. This reinforces the user as the prime mover. User motion can transform the whole design. So some interaction that you do could actually make things change completely. All actions should take place in a single environment, but objects, even if you transform the whole design, they should have a continuity as they transform. Motion should focus the attention and maintain continuity. Feedback is subtle yet clear, and transitions should be efficient and coherent. So material is in a 3D environment. It's a flat design in a 3D world. So most of you are hopefully familiar with flat design. It's very common these days. But with material design, you sort of have layers of flat design that cast shadows upon other layers. So it's a little bit of a mix, like almost a 2.5D type of thing, not quite. All objects are rendered on sheets. And all sheets have a z-axis and it's one device-independent pixel thick. So, and the z-axis is always perpendicular to the plane of the display. So you never have images that are going to flip. You're not going to have origami-like effects. It's not meant to be part of the metaphor for material design. Whoops, sorry. I don't know how I went so far back. So light and shadow. There are two lights that illuminate objects inside the material design space. There's the key light, which creates the directional shadow. There's an ambient light that creates a soft shadow from all angles, and they combine together to give you the look at the right there. I guess one more thing here, the distance that you are from the other surfaces, every sheet is only 1 pixel thick. There's no such thing as having sort of volume. And then they cast the shadow. So the distance that it is from the z-axis below it will create differences in the shadow. And that's how you can tell if something's changing size, for instance, whether or not it's actually growing in size or coming towards you. The shadow will provide that sort of information, because a circle, for instance, could be coming towards you or getting larger, and the circle itself will be the same, growing, but the shadow will convey that information. So material properties. Materials can change shape and elevation. They can cast shadows. They display content. They can join together and split apart and heal. There were some examples of that in the video. They can be spontaneously generated and destroyed. And they move along, but usually that's through user interaction. And they move along any axis, X, Y, or Z. Materials should not pass through other materials, cannot occupy the same space as another material object. They do not bend, and they do not change thickness. They're always one device independent pixel. And let's see here. So here's just always one pixel thick, never with volume. You can see how the shadows change as something moves in elevation here. See, content can spread across. The actual content can change sizes or stay the same as the sheet itself changes size, and so you only reveal a portion of it. Materials are solid. You can't click through them. Let's go back to... So objects in 3D space. All material objects have a resting elevation, their standard elevation. And the elevation, once again, should only change through user interaction. But if the object does change through some user interaction, it should quickly return to its original elevation. Elevation is responsive, so larger screens actually have greater depth. Shadows can provide visual cues about arrangement. Every object has a single parent. Of course, it may also have, parents or children. How did I move so far scrolling? Shadows provide visual cues about arrangement. Every object has a single parent. It may also have children or siblings, as I mentioned, and children inherit properties from their parents. So a child inside on an object or sheet, if you rotate the parent, obviously the child will rotate with it. If you change the scale, it'll change. If you change the elevation, it'll change. So motion should be authentic. Observing an object's motion tells us whether it is light or heavy, flexible or rigid, small or large. It should accelerate objects swiftly and decelerate them slowly to avoid abrupt changes in velocity. This gives it a more natural feel, like you're actually moving a physical object. When an object enters the frame, ensure that it's moving at its peak velocity. So animation, the most common animation in the material world is the ripple. So as you touch something, there's usually a circle ripple coming out from that point. So upon input, you should get some form of instantaneous visual feedback. Typically, that's that ripple. New materials should originate from point of origin. So if you click on a button, in theory, if a new element appears, it should appear from the button. It should seem to appear from the button. When element is activated, it should lift on touch, and once again, should quickly return to its rest elevation. You should have meaningful transitions with visual continuity, hierarchical timing. In other words, don't have everything happen at once. Have things sort of flow. Consistent choreography. And delightful details. So here's a couple of delightful details. So for instance, the menu icon. When you click the menu, it turns into the back button by rotating and the three lines changing into the arrow. And here's some others. The pause turning to stop and play. Things incrementing, and our loading routines here. Sure. Great. So color palettes and themes. There's a predefined color palettes, actually. Let me show you those quickly. So these, you can actually download them, and they look very different on that screen. Trust me, they're a lot more vibrant down here. You can download them for Adobe products. I'm going to make this bigger so you get the 3 columns here. So these are predefined color palettes available. I'm just quickly scrolling through so you can see them. You can also define your own, and these come in their CSS files are available for you to define these color palettes. So you should limit your selection to 2 palettes, a primary and an accent. 3 color hues from your primary palette and 1 color from the accent, with possible fallback options in order to have proper contrast. Instead of using various levels of black for text, you should always be using black with various alpha levels. This allows text to always be visible on different surfaces. Toolbar should use the primary 500 color. That's one of the colors in the palette. Status bar should be the darker primary 700 color. Using accent colors for primary action and components. So in other words, the main button in an app should be the accent color. And you'll see that there's usually a very different color that defines the button that's the main action. Also, the accent color could also be used for switches that are on or text that's a link. So that's where the accent color will come into play. So for instance, on this page, red is my accent color. It's not necessarily material design, but you get the feeling. If the accent color is too light, that's when you use your fallback accent for greater contrast. You can use the primary color on white, or use white or black at 54% alpha on primary 500. So these are like the definitions of how to make things look using material design. So you've got imagery and text, bold images to communicate and differentiate, and typography should be legible on imagery with the use of scrims. So here on the left, it's very hard to read the @Gmail portion of the email address because it's on the fuchsia background there, and there's not a lot of contrast. In the second version, we have a scrim at the bottom that gives a little bit of change in color as you hit the bottom, and so that allows the text to have much greater contrast. So that's material design quickly and visually. So now let's talk a little bit about AngularJS. Hopefully you have familiarity with it. I know some of you do. So AngularJS has dependency injection and services and modules. It's got its two-way data binding, standard directives and directives you can write yourself. There's animations and effects, and it has data-aware components. So Angular material elements is basically AngularJS plus the themes from material design. CSS layout, ARIA support, which is accessibility for rich internet applications. So that allows people who are blind, for instance, you're putting in extra information, so that information will be available in another form. Ink and user experience effects, component services, and rich user interface components are all part of the Angular material libraries that you can use with Angular material. So now I step back here. Where did the first implementation of material design happen? It was not in Angular. So they're kind of trying to take this implementation that happened using what was Polymer with what is called paper elements. Paper elements is the implementation of material design for Polymer, which is a web components library. So paper elements for Polymer are the original implementation. Polymer is built on top of web components. And they allow you to define custom HTML elements. So by linking in the appropriate Polymer web component, here we're linking in the web component for Google Map. And you see that allows us to then use a tag. This looks a lot like Angular. Google Map with latitude and longitude. So that's a lot of functionality that web components is giving you. So it's similar to Angular directives. In fact, I'm going to show you the difference between an implementation of an Angular directive and a web component in a moment. Web components are W3C specified standards. The World Wide Web Consortium has these standards, and the three standards that make up web components are the shadow DOM, custom elements, and HTML imports. And I have links here to documentation that you can follow up. All of these here are links so that you can follow up on your own later on. So I'm going to discuss briefly the difference between Polymer and Angular. So the shadow DOM allows for custom elements, shadow DOM being part of web components and Polymer. And this gives us encapsulated JavaScript, encapsulated CSS, and HTML. AngularJS is similar, but it doesn't use web components underneath. It also does not have encapsulated CSS, which is very helpful in certain cases. So Polymer and AngularJS both provide templating and bidirectional data bindings. But Angular does not provide the encapsulable CSS yet. So the Angular team will eventually be using the Web Components APIs underneath for 2.0. So Web Components being a standard will eventually be used as part of Angular. So for a comparison of an element that renders a gravatar, so in both methods, we'll create a custom element usable like this. So I'm going to show you the difference between an implementation of this tag using web components and using AngularJS. So here we see user gravatar, you define an email address, and that should make the gravatar appear. Everybody here familiar with gravatars? They're kind of like standardized pictures of your identity on the web for various websites. So just by giving your email address, you should basically be able to have your face appear. So when rendered, it will convert the name and email address into a hash that allows you to load up the image of your predefined image of your headshot or profile image. So the user gravatar with email will transfer to an image source like so. So let's take a look at it in Angular first. Angular being what I've spent a lot more time using. So in Angular, you'd create a directive, and you'd define it as user gravatar, and you'd load in another library like MD5 for the hashing function, and then you say you're going to restrict this to be only for element tags. That's what the E stands for. And then you have a link function that says when we get our scope, the GID will be equal to the MD5 hash of the email address that we used in the actual the attribute inside the directive. So, and then we have a template that will be the output, and it looks very much like the output should, except we're dropping in the GID into the very end for the hash. And so that will output, once again, at the bottom here, the image source with the proper gravatar avatar. Now let's take a look at it using Polymer custom elements. This is newer technology, and once again, defined to be a web standard. So we have a Polymer element. Once again, name is user gravatar, and the attribute's email. And now we have a template that shows what it's going to output. And the output, once again, looks very similar. Image source with the gravatar avatar and the GID. And then the actual script that does it, it actually says the ready has a function. This.gid will equal the MD5 hash of the email. So this is basically they're doing the exact same thing with different technologies. So Polymer uses a declarative syntax. Both accomplish the same thing. Angular 2.0, web components will work seamlessly within AngularJS. In fact, you will be able to export an AngularJS component to web components as part of the hope for 2.0. And the web component specification eventually will be implemented directly in the browsers, and Polymer will use browser functionality instead of polyfills, which are available today, so that you could actually use web components today without the browser supporting it, just by adding the polyfill JavaScript libraries. Okay, so now we're going back to Angular material directives. This is how to use material design within Angular. So if you don't have an Angular background, this is not going to be as useful. Basically, these are the directives available. So you can have a material design button, a material design card, checkbox, a content area, divider. You can have an item within a list. You can have a progress that's circular, or you can have a progress bar. You have radio buttons and groups of radio buttons. You can have slide navigations, a slider. You have subheaders. You can swipe left and swipe right. You have switches and tabs, text that can float. You can have toolbars and tooltips. Now, I've done some demos with some of these elements, and there are a few sample apps out there that I link to. So, and all of these are links to the actual documentation. So, for instance, if we want to go straight to the button demo, this actually is the documentation for button. It's a little bit small there, but now if we want to look at the demo, here's a demo, and this is actually using Angular, and the source code is available right here. So if there's something that you're actually interested in, you should be looking at the documentation, which I link to. Okay, let's return to full screen here. So Angular material has container elements. So this is a responsive CSS layout that's built on top of Flexbox. Flexbox is now being supported by most browsers. It's a much better way of doing layout than previous ways inside of browsers. I prefer it. Sometimes it's hard to use with older systems. You kind of have to transfer to using Flexbox completely. And Angular material, since it's starting from scratch, has the advantage of just saying, I'm using Flexbox. So here we have an attribute of any tag. We have basically a directives in Angular material design that allows us to define the layout simply as an attribute here. So we have a div and we say layout equals row, and that will actually lay out this as a row. No CSS required. Kind of makes it a little easier when you look at it. So now you know this will lay out something on the left and something on the right. Whereas if we do layouts as columns, you'll have something above and something below. So this makes it very easy to do your layouts in Angular material. Angular material has child alignment. So you have this layout align attribute that takes two words. The first word is start center and space around or space between. And this defines the alignment in the layout's direction, which is either row or column. So if it's a row, its start would be at the top and end would be at the bottom, center would be in the middle. If it's a column, start would be at the left, end would be at the right, etc. And then the second word defines the perpendicular alignment. So whatever, the secondary alignment. And I believe there's a really great little demo here that I'm going to bring up. So here we can actually switch from row to column, and you could see that happening in real time. You can say you want space around, and you get a sense of what that looks like. You can put it at the end of the perpendicular. So this is a row, and by putting it at the end, it puts it at the bottom. But if we change it to column, it puts it from top to bottom, but putting it at the end puts it all the way to the right, the perpendicular direction. And then you can look at the source, and you can see basically all it's doing to achieve this is this simple line. I don't know if that text is a little too small, but it says layout equals column, layout align, space around, end. Makes it very easy to change your alignments, much easier than all these CSS ways that currently exist, based on Flexbox. Okay. I think yes. So it also has a grid system. Attributes customize size and position within the layout using Flex. Flex will make something stretch to take up the available space. You could put a percentage on the flex to say this should take up 33% or any multiple of 5. So basically it's a multiple of 33 or a multiple of 5 are the only things that are allowed within the percentages. That's the restriction. And it should add up to 100. And if you leave one that's unlabeled, it'll take up the remaining space. Also, we have a flex order, which allows us to set the position of an element inside of a flex container. So if I say flex order equals 1, this would place the child element in the first position, even if it was not the first one that was defined. So Angular material has responsive layout capabilities. This is very similar to Bootstrap, if you're familiar with that. So we have not just layout, but we also have layout small, layout greater than small, layout medium, layout greater than medium, layout large, layout greater than large. We have the same thing for flex, flex small, greater than small, etc. So this allows you to set the layout or the flex on devices with different screen sizes. This gives you responsive design built in to Angular material. You also can define elements to disappear at certain screen sizes, which is standard responsive design. You say, okay, well, when I'm on a certain screen, I don't want this to appear. So this is some of the functionality that's actually built into Bootstrap, if you're familiar with it, and actually Angular material has that built in for you. So services, we have 3 main services here. The ability to pop up a dialog, the ability to pop up a bottom sheet from the bottom that could be like a menu that pops up. Also, a toast or snack bar notification. That's usually a small notification that appears to tell you that something's transpired. You can set it at any position, and you could optionally have it disappear after a short duration. Or you could click on it to make it disappear. So Angular material itself is still maturing. The code is being updated regularly. I see Andy Jocelyn constantly checking in code. There's only a few sample apps really out there. So I'm going to look at some of the sample apps, and then we're going to look at the code that I wrote. The code I wrote I'll be putting on GitHub shortly. I'll link it here. I'll announce it on Twitter. So let's just take a look. First, there's just this home page here. I don't have a username and login for this, but you can see it has the material design look. He mentioned it in one of the talks. He kind of said, hey, look, I did something. And then I came to it, and I'm like, I don't have the username and password. So yay, it looks like a material design site. But that's about it. Notice the accent color of green is really sharp and strong here, and you can tell that that's the button, that's the first thing you should do. Let's go back. This one's kind of nice. It's, and he actually wrote a lot of documentation on what his thoughts were, why he did this. And I'm going to open it up as more of a mobile app so that we get a sense of how it looks in the mobile world. Because it looks a lot better at the mobile sizes. So here you can say, oh, it's supposed to give you NBA scores for certain teams and the like. So here, USA, Finland, you can get stats. You can see how things pop up and populate. These are using MD lists and MD items that were discussed. I'll show you some of that in my own code. I'm not going to go through somebody else's code. I'm going to show you some of my own. You can look at the USA team. You can look at the Finland team. And you can see the UI elements and how they play out. Let's take a look at Turkey here. Basically the same thing. You can get a play-by-play. Maybe that information's not available. Let's see if I can. What was nice is he actually used, for the play-by-plays, which I don't see them yet, for the play-by-play, he kind of parsed out, there it is, he parsed out a user's name, and if he found that he could find on the NBA website their headshot, he then added it to the app. And he's actually pulling live the data from the NBA website to get these headshots. So he didn't go and, he was basically taking advantage of an NBA API that was already out there. I've also seen somebody that tried to write a Twitter search app using Angular material. It's, you got to like check it out and then try and get it running, and even then it was a little buggy, so I'm not going to display that. So let's take a look at my code. I got about 7 minutes left here. So I should definitely make this bigger. Let's see if I can just do that. The theme for, oh, do you know where that is? I guess it's under, well, let me first change the size, because that'll make a big difference. I guess that didn't do anything. Yeah, I tried it. Didn't even enter it. Let me try getting out of view. There we go. All of a sudden, okay, now you still think I still think you're right. It's a little too dark. Okay, let's take a look at, yeah. It's not one thing, it's another. Let me try and quit and come back in. Any questions while I'm pulling this up? I doubt it, simply because Angular material is still in development, and web components implementation is much more mature, so chances are it's done with Polymer. I don't even have to look to, I could probably guess that, yeah. I got some confirmation from somebody doing AngularJS source code. Anybody else? Well, there's been some talk about that, and there's some really good questions about that. I mean, definitely the design, as from the first half of this talk, you could tell that a lot of this had to do with, just good UI and good UX, and it defines it well. But then it also establishes like a brand, if you will, and a style that's consistent. And one of the goals here is to have a consistent style between web and mobile, and in fact, you're gonna start seeing web apps that look just like their mobile app versions, and so that's what they're going for. Now, can you do this? Yes, because it's a web standard. You could be using PhoneGap, or I know Ionic is the big push behind the Angular material version because Ionic's built on Angular, so they're the ones pushing through trying to get the ability to create Ionic apps using the Angular material look and feel. However, could you do it on iOS? Yes. Should you? That's kind of, I find there's 3 ways to go. One is to say, yes, I have one look for both applications, whether it be iOS or Android. The app's going to look the same and function the same. That way, if somebody goes from one to the other, they're going to get the exact same look. The other one is to say, you know what, I'm going to convert my app to look more like an app for iOS on iOS. I'm going to make my app look more like an Android app on Android, and you kind of have 2 different design directions. So it really depends on what you're going for. A lot of people will just say, you know what, I'm going to choose something that nobody's seen before, and that way when they see it, it's like my design. It's not necessarily the best because the user experience will be like, wait, what am I supposed to do? I don't have the common, the pointers that are telling me what's the first thing I should do in this app. But some people go that way, especially for things like games. If you take like Candy Crush, for instance, it doesn't look like an iOS app, or it doesn't look like an Android app. It's just its own thing, and it's consistent. Let me try to change my resolution. Is that going to screw? Okay, you think that'll be the fast way to? Okay, I'm accessibility. Okay. Okay, here's some code. Is that legible is really the question. Except now when I show you the actual demos, they're also going to be inverted. So that's kind of ruined everything. Maybe I should show you the demos first and then come back to the. So I only have a couple more minutes, but I was told I could go a couple over. And if you guys, so let me show you the demo first. And I'm going to keep this available so I can switch really quickly. So from the HTML, I can just go. Okay, so here's some stuff that I did. I just quickly threw this together. I went through basically went through the examples, and I cut and pasted some stuff. And it wasn't easy, I'll tell you, because the way the documentation is put together, it's all done using partials. So it's really hard to see, like, hey, what's supposed to be here? What's surrounding this partial? So in some ways, the documentation is not as good as it could be for someone who's just starting out. There needs to be, somebody needs to submit to Git, and maybe I'll be the one that does that. Something that says, here's like just a starter template to get you going. Because the documentation requires you to kind of know the whole structure of the documentation system itself. So I created a dialog. So did you notice that it grew out of the button? Not quite, but it came from the same direction. And that's sort of supposed to be part of the concept of Angular. Now, could I have made it come from another direction? Yes. Should I? No. So really, there's nothing stopping you. It's not like it's built in that it will come from that direction. But conceptually, if you want to give you good UI and UX, you should be doing stuff like that. There's left nav bar functionality. You can, I used to have a close button there, but I had a pop-up, but I guess that's not where, oh yeah, here's the pop-up. So notice how the pop-up sort of grows with that radial, that's like the main visual effect of Angular material is that radial look. Notice when I click on a button here, notice how it radiates out from the point of clicking. These are disabled buttons. This toggles this to make the button enabled. This one has no ink. This is a button that doesn't have, no ink means no radial. So I can click on that. You can have, oh yeah, these also have tooltips. You have these nice little tooltips, tells you what they are. You can have buttons that sort of blend in as links. This one actually will go to the Google website. I'm not going to click it. And then, of course, you can theme your buttons. You have to include the CSS. And in my version, I included each of the themes separately as separate CSS files so that you can kind of get a sense of what's going on. Whereas when you look at the documentation, they kind of just have one big, hey, every theme has already been imported. Obviously, your tool chains, if you're using Grunt or Gulp, and will be concatenating whatever it is, your CSS, and maybe minifying your JavaScript at the end. But in order to understand what's going on, you really want to see things plain. So now I'm going to invert again. So hopefully you can see this. So here, I had a toolbar at the top that was indigo. I'd show it to you again, except it's probably like fuchsia now. I mean, who knows what color it is now. We have content on the left. So we have a side navigation that we can close. So this is the side nav right here. So it's really easy to create a side navigation. It's just a tag, MD, Material Design Side Nav in Angular, not hard. We can create sections with lists. I don't know if you noticed the dividers. Let me try and show that to you again. There's some lines there, I swear. See the slight gray line there? So these are the dividers that are accessible to you. So this just gives us some, these are the buttons that open the left nav and close the left nav. Here we see toggle left. This is standard, for anybody that's done Angular before, this is all now standard Angular, but giving you the look and feel of Material Design. We have a radio group here with apple, banana, and mango, and we lay them out in a row. So here we see that layout, and here we also see layout align, as I described earlier, for the checkboxes. Let's take a look at the checkboxes again. So they're laid out top to bottom. Oh, I also made this only appear when checkbox 2 is pressed, just because it was really annoying to watch all the time. So that would be like a loading routine that's built in. Also notice the radial out as I click. And the same thing's here true for the radio buttons, the radial out. Any questions on this? I'm going to make this code available so you can see it. It's pretty much standard AngularJS. It seems to be like choosing what direction to go on its own. I have not set it to go in a particular direction. Wow, I think. Did I mention that this is still under development? Yeah, this is still in very much beta, practically alpha at this point. Once again, material design itself is mature, but the Angular material implementation is not. Yes? I think a lot of the material philosophy has legs. I think you could copy them and the philosophies and not necessarily have the same look. In fact, I think Bootstrap has 1 or 2 implementations that does look like it. Definitely the radial thing I think is really pretty, and I think people will be copying that whether or not they copy everything else. I think a lot of this stuff even comes from the OS X or even earlier, where you see the shadowing effects of the windows. That's been standard in OS X forever. Defining how the shadows actually, it's a little bit more defined. Hey, there's this concept of layers, and if it's further away, you have a bigger shadow. I think that's really good stuff to keep with. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. The bold colors and the palettes, that stuff could change very easily, and you'd still have all the other good UI and UX stuff. It's not like that has to be part of any UI or UX, and I guess this comes back to whether or not your app should use this particular philosophy or one that's, the great thing about studying this is you have a sense of, hey, what is good UI, good UX, and what should I be applying? One thing in particular I liked was the concept that text should be black with an alpha as opposed to various shades of gray, so that no matter what it's on top of, it'll have some sort of difference. And I was like, wow, that's, nowadays in the web you have alpha is just built in as long as you're using one of the evergreen browsers. I think you'd have to go back to even IE9 to not have that, which I guess isn't that old, and people who's here from Microsoft again, the last talk. But I'm saying, like, now that these things are standard, that should become a standard. I never thought of it because you still had to support older browsers. Now that you don't have to do that, that should be a way to just go. Text should be an alpha layer. And that wasn't something I thought of until I read it in there. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Any other questions? This is all HTML5. It's all done with Angular. So Angular, basically the JavaScript is analyzing the DOM and sort of manipulating it, and is kind of in control of the DOM. Yes, yeah. Essentially, the directives get translated by Angular, and then web components is sort of the similar kind of concept, where there's this sort of translation layer or the definition of new tags. And that's something I think that Angular sort of popularized, and now web components is going to standardize. Okay, the presentation is available. Here are some resources. I'll leave that full screen for everybody. That's where the presentation is available. I will once again, I should probably add in my Twitter handle is @Zen Digital. I'll be tweeting where the actual source code is once I upload it. And I'll probably put a link in here as well, so if you have access to this. These are the resources I use to write this, and as I mentioned, there are tons of links in this actual presentation, so you will be able to go through the docs, and it'll bring you right to the specific places. Any other questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you very much. I'm Daniel Zen, Zen Digital. I appreciate your time.